Georgia in 2008. I want to get your take on the forces involved in that, because clearly you look at it, that was the West trying to go in and test Russia. But there are a lot of telltale signs that it was staged when the police stood down. The argument was, well, they're doing that to look friendly. But the rest of the government stood down as well. And then I guess the country goes into a permanent destabilization where they can play the literal right and left off, the two different sides of the country, the right from the West and the Russian from the East, and then just use that as a tool of political control. I know Russia to a certain extent collaborates with the EU, but is against the Anglo-American, British, U.S. power bloc. Explain the strategy there.
Well, the strategy is, remember, that Russia has always intended to strike the West. They want to run their own new world order with them in control. We've got a temporary pact with China to join with them to control the world, and they'll have to fight it out, whatever. And they haven't gone that far down the road. But the goal is to take down the hegemony of the West. But they're not ready to do that yet. So what I'm saying is it's very important to understand that in the status quo that was going on before, last Friday and before, was that the pro-Western Western Ukrainians were the beleaguered ones, and Russia was the bad guys. That's all the news kept saying. Russia has ironclad control of Ukraine, and the Westerners want to be free. The Russians are the bad guys. Now it's been reversed. And this is why this really plays to Russia's favor. Because if they want to postpone the eventual taking back of the Soviet states, whether it's Czechoslovakia, Poland, Ukraine, Georgia, etc., instead of playing like they're independent, if they want to take them back with force someday, they got to wait till they're militarily ready to take on the West, and they're not. So we've got several years that they've got to bide their time. But in order to do that, you've got to play the same game that Hitler played by attacking his own people, the Germans, in Poland and in Czechoslovakia, in order to justify that intrusion. It's too early for that justification. Everybody keeps thinking Russia's going to attack Ukraine right now to take it back, and it's too early. It's going to make Russia look very, very bad. They want more disarmament with the West. The West wants more unilateral disarmament with Russia to make sure that they pave the way for this war. And so what they've got to do is slow the process down. Now what happened? After Saturday's phony coup, now the Eastern Russians are the beleaguered people. And it's the Western Ukraine that's going to be the bad guys. That's why they had to have all of the pro-Russian majority in the Rada, in the parliament, resign, so that now it can be a majority of pro-Western people. They can get the blame for everything. Plus the fact that this allows the West to come to the rescue of Ukraine's bankruptcy. I mean, Ukraine is literally bankruptcy. They instituted currency controls today. The West, just like in the former Soviet Union, they're going to take over all of the payments and give bailout money to them. Russians are loving this. But the most important thing to remember now is that from now on in advance, the phony opposition, these are run by Russians, but they're going to be claiming to be pro-EU. They're going to get the blame for everything that happens now. You're not going to see Eastern Ukraine and the Crimea secede. You're not going to see independence, and here's why. If they were to become independent, these majoritarian Russian populations in Eastern Ukraine and Crimea, everybody would be happy. The Western Ukrainians would be happy, and so would the Easterns, and you wouldn't have conflict anymore. What you're going to see is Russia's going to accept some type of federalization, which means that they're going to be federalized under a Ukrainian nation, but that means that the eastern portions will always be able to complain in the future about being underrepresented and oppressed by the dominant Western government. And eventually they can tweak that with protesters and with ongoing unrest so that in a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, when they do want to take back Ukraine, they'll have the justification to do that. So do you see what I'm saying? You're going to have a much better permanent system of conflict by allowing Western Ukraine to go in, ostensibly to go into Western hands, when in fact it is Russian puppets playing as if they're in Western hands.
I want to come back and talk about Georgia and then take phone calls on the waterfront about strategy of the globalists, where you see that going Michael wants to ask you about U.S. flags being banned in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals if the illegals find them offensive. Ray wants to ask you some other questions. Folks want to ask about smart tech and all the surveillance grid, the NSA. So Joel Skousen of WorldAffairsBrief.com is our guest. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com on this live Friday edition. And I'll be back this Sunday, Lord willing, 4 to 6 p.m. with the Sunday live transmission right here on GCN.
Alright, so that was clip number 2. As you can see, Infowars is where you can get a lot of information about this kind of thing. Stuff that the mass media is not going to show you. And he gets people in there with a perspective that are very informed. And this is Eugene Roundtree III signing off with High Voltage News. And wishing you guys a good night.